Molly Saves the Day, Chapter 3 Creepy Crawlies. They don't have to be real worms. She just has to think they're worms, said Molly. She and Susan were crawling in the dirt under the wooden platform beneath their tent. They were digging with cups from their mess kits to find worms. We can use bugs and spiders, too. I saw lots of them under here last week during camp cleanup and get sticks and stems like this, see? Molly held up a stem. It was brown and slimy enough to look like a worm. Ugh, squirmed Susan. I don't like this plan. I think it's mean. Molly sighed. Do you have another idea? She asked. No, said Susan, but I don't see why we have to do something so mean to Linda. She's our best friend. We're not doing it to Linda, said Molly. We're doing it to the Red Army. You can't think of people as people during a war. You think of them as part of an army. Well, Susan began. Look, said Molly sharply. Linda surely wasn't thinking of us as her friends when she blew that whistle on us, was she? No, admitted Susan. So we shouldn't think of her as our friend Linda. We should think of her as the guard for the Red Army. She's got our whole army in her prison. We have to get them free, or we won't even have a chance to capture the flag and win the color war. That's why we have to do this, said Molly. This was Molly's plan. It depended on worms. Molly and Susan grubbed in the dirt on their hands and knees. Molly's shirt stuck to her back. Susan's face was red and sweaty. I've sweated so much I'm wetter than I was when I fell in the lake, complained Susan. Well, we'd better stop, said Molly. Her hands were grimy. Susan held up an old tin can. It was only half full of worms and bugs and stems. There's not very much stuff in here, she said. There's not very much time, said Molly. We have to go now. Okay, said Susan. She and Molly wiggled like worms themselves to get out from under the tent. The sky was white hot, and they plodded back to the boathouse. Molly pushed the canoe into the water. She started to get in the back. Susan said, No, sir, I'm not getting in the front again. That's the tippiest part. No, it isn't, said Molly, but Susan was stubborn. I'm not getting in the front of that canoe with it, and that's final. Do you want to tip over like the last time? Molly remembered her plunge into the water. All right, she said. I'll get in the front, but I won't be able to help you paddle. The Red Scout has got to think there's only one of us in the canoe, or she might guess the plan. Well, you lie down, said Susan. The scout won't be able to see you. So Molly lay down on the bottom of the canoe next to the extra paddle, and Susan pushed off. With Susan paddling, the canoe jerked forward like a darting fish. It rolled from side to side, but it did move. Soon Susan said, There's the Red Scout. She sees me. Just keep paddling, hissed Molly. They were not far from the island. The canoe zigzagged, sometimes heading away from the island, then heading straight for it. Susan, said Molly, you're supposed to switch your paddle from side to side every few strokes, so the canoe will go in a line. I can't do it that way, Susan said shortly. I'm doing it the only way I know how. Maybe that's good, said Molly. It will confuse the Red Scout. She won't be able to figure out what you're trying to do. Now head for that hidden landing place we found last time. In a surprisingly short time, they got to the landing place they'd found when the canoe tipped over. Susan banged the canoe on the rocks, but she managed to get it into the narrow space. Molly sat up. Okay, she said. Give me your paddle. Here are the worms. The plan was for Molly to paddle the canoe around to the beach. Susan would climb around the edge of the island to the prison and free the rest of the Blue Army. Then she would swim out to Molly and the canoe. But Susan held on to the paddle. Listen, she said. This Red Scout just saw me paddling across the lake. Won't she think it's funny if she sees you paddling around the beach? I think I should stay with the canoe, and you should do the worm prisoner part. But that means you'll have to handle the canoe all by yourself, said Molly. Are you sure you can do it? Susan shrugged. I don't know, she said. I got this far. Maybe I can do the rest. Anyway, I'll try. Molly looked at Susan. You're pretty brave, she said. You've got the hard part, said Susan. You might get caught by the Red Army. No, said Molly with a little grin. I figure they will be so busy watching the way you paddle a canoe they'll never notice me. Susan smiled. Good luck, she said. As Molly scrambled up the rocks, Susan backed the canoe into the lake. Molly moved as quickly as she could, staying very close to the water. For a while she could see Susan's canoe moving along offshore. Then the canoe disappeared around the point of land, and Molly couldn't see it anymore. Molly crept around the shore toward the prison. She kept a sharp lookout for the Red Army. Suddenly, Molly stopped. Here was a surprise. The path was gone. She was standing at the edge of an inlet that cut into the shore of Chocolate Drop Island. Molly could see the prison on the other side of the inlet. Why wasn't this inlet in Dorinda's map? Molly asked herself. The water looked deep. Well, thought Molly, I'll just have to swim across to get to the prison. There's no other way. She put the can of worms down her undershirt and tucked her shirt tightly into her shorts. Then she waded into the water. When it reached her shoulders, Molly dog paddled as quietly as she could, keeping her head well above the water. When she was about halfway across, she stopped. Oh no, she thought, Linda. Linda was walking through the bushes behind the prison. She was coming right toward Molly. Linda's whistle glinted in the sun. Molly held her breath as if it would make her invisible. If Linda sees me, I'm done for, she thought. The whole Blue Army is done for. But there is no place to hide in the middle of the water. There is nowhere to go but... Down, thought Molly. I'll have to swim underwater. Molly shuddered. I can't make myself do it, she thought. But Linda was coming closer and closer. Quickly, Molly took a deep breath and slid down under the surface. The water swallowed her. She forced herself to open her eyes. Greeny gold sunlight filtered through the water. Plants writhed like snakes next to her. Maybe if I move, it won't be so bad, Molly thought. She fluttered her legs and pulled with her arms. The can of worms was cold against her skin. Finally, she couldn't hold her breath any longer. She bobbed up for air. Thank goodness, Linda had turned her back. She was moving away from Molly, watching something out in the big lake of the opposite end of the beach. It was Susan, waving her paddle around, slapping against the water, calling, Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo! The Red Army girls were all watching Susan. They buzzed like confused bees. Get the canoes! We've got to take her prisoner, one girl yelled. No, she's coming to shore, yelled another. Susan kept them guessing. She zigzagged toward the land one second and zigzagged out into the deeper water the next second. But all the while she was leading the girls farther and farther down the beach, far away from the prison. Only Linda stayed near it, standing guard. Molly scuttled out of the inlet like a crab, keeping an eye on Linda the whole time. She hid behind a bush while she caught her breath. But there was no time to waste. She pulled the lid off the can and sneaked quietly toward the prison. When Linda's back was turned, Molly dashed up behind her and yelled, Worms! She dumped the stuff in the can on Linda's head. Spiders and stems went down the back of Linda's shirt. Sticks and bugs fell all over her face. Worms were caught in her hair. Ah! Linda howled, Help! She clawed at her hair, trying to pull the worms off. She jumped up and down wildly. She turned and saw Molly. You! She cried. Molly froze. She was supposed to tag Linda and take her prisoner. She couldn't do it. This was Linda, her friend. She didn't look like the fierce Red Army guard anymore. She was plain old Linda. She looked like she was going to cry. Molly ran away. She rushed toward her teammates who were prisoners. Blue Army, you're free, she yelled, and she tagged them. Follow me, hurry up. With a great cheer, the Blue Army stampeded out of the prison. Linda didn't stop anyone. She was still pulling worms out of her hair. The Blue Army girls dragged their canoes into the lake, jumped into them, and paddled furiously, churning the water white. Some girls swam next to the canoes as their buddies paddled, and others had the leg up on the side of their canoe, trying to climb aboard. When the Red Army girls saw what was happening, they ran crazily in all directions. Some headed up the hill to protect the flag, some ran across the beach toward the prison, and some went to their canoes to try to chase the Blue Army. They were shouting, stumbling, and bumping into one another. Susan paddled her canoe toward Molly, coming close to the shore. Molly swam as fast as she could to the canoe. Get in, cried Susan. Molly pulled herself into the canoe. Carefully, Susan leaned way to the other side to balance Molly's weight, and then she was safe in the canoe. Molly turned back to look at the beach. Linda was standing all alone, her hands hung down at her sides. She wasn't even trying to blow her whistle. Molly made herself turn away. She picked up her paddle and followed the rest of the Blue Army back to camp. The war wasn't over yet, but Molly felt as if she had already lost something very important.